Kia ora ana tātou katoa, ko Tongariro, toku monga, ko Waikato, toku awa, ko Mātātua, toku waka, ko Atu, toku motu, ko Adrian Orr, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Me mahi tahi tātou, mō te oranga e te katoa. May we all work together for the well-being of everyone, and that really is the main part of the speech that I want people to walk away and think about. So thank you today for joining us all here to discuss our new monetary policy framework. That is the core reason. The recent amendment to our legislation sets up a monetary policy committee, and the idea of this committee is that it is responsible for our new dual mandate of monetary policy. And that is about keeping inflation low and stable, may we never take that for granted, and for supporting maximum sustainable employment. So we've got the inflation and the employment legs to it. The committee's deliberation process is aimed to ensure that we benefit from a wide, diverse range of opinions, that we benefit from greater transparency around how we come to our decisions, and that we can all see and probably be less surprised when things keep moving, that we aren't just looking at each data observation. It is both science and judgment on the way through, so the committee will add a lot to the judgment. But before I outline that, I really want to talk about some of the backdrop to the change, because the change is underway and is still ongoing across the whole of the bank. And the change really is about responding to a changing environment that central banks, including Tipu Te Matua, have to operate in globally. Some of that change, I would say, is favourable, and some is really confronting and challenging for central banks and for society. On the favourable side, I've already mentioned the good work of past and present people about keeping inflation low and stable, and unemployment is low at present, and we have broad financial stability, touch wood. So that is a fantastic starting point, and that should never be taken for granted, and I want to know that we are not going to take our focus off those core activities for the central bank. Low and stable inflation, maximising sustainable employment, and looking for a stable financial system. Having said that, on the challenging side, in addition to maintaining the status quo, we have some very significant long-term challenges in front of us all, and that central banks are being asked to respond to. In the financial system alone, we have rising global economic interdependence. It's already high, it's continuing to rise, bringing challenges. We have dominant financial institutions. In fact, they've got larger and more dominant post-GFC, despite all of the efforts and discussions about we will never go back there. And we've got significant debt burdens in society. We've also got massive technology change, which is really challenging the role of people in production and the demands on people and the skills that are needed in ways that we just can't foresee. And so these are all challenges for us. And at a much wider range, we've got the acknowledgement around the climate change we're experiencing and the implications that has for both financial stability, but also the role that financial institutions and pricing can play in both the management and the mitigation of that risk going forward. So that's a long but not full list of challenges that the central bank has to operate within and meet society's expectations. I mean, the refreshed Reserve Bank Act and the Monetary Policy Review is a small change, and we'll talk about how that operates, but it does put the organisation under a much bigger challenge to continue to evolve, and that's what we're amongst the change. And we must remember, and I forget myself being the governor of the central bank, he gets so focused on the daily minute-by-minute mahi that we're all involved in, that the fundamental purpose of the bank is to promote the prosperity and well-being of New Zealanders and to contribute to a sustainable and productive economy. And that sits in our Reserve Bank Act, and I don't think that people talk about that enough, and you are going to hear more and more of that talk from the central bank now and ongoing. Before I go there, I do want to take a little quick step back and a little bit from what Mahanga was talking about, and really it's about the key role of a public institution and why we have a picture of Tāne Mahuta, or a representation of Tāne Mahuta, on my shoulder. The key role of public institutions really is to bring to life the terms of a contract between us, society, and a representative government. It's about putting a legal body, an entity, some people around, bringing that contract to life. These contracts are social contracts, and they will always evolve depending on what is happening in society: economic, social, cultural, environmental. So contracts evolve through time, and that is negotiated through the democratic process in this country. So that is a wonderful place to be. What it means, though, is that institutions like Te Pūtea Matua need to evolve with that social contract, in keeping with these shifting cultural, economic, social, environmental expectations that society has, because it's the people that will give us our social license to operate and give us our integrity, our legitimacy to operate. So earning and retaining this institutional legitimacy is a continuous and evolving challenge. Some things you don't want to evolve too fast, other things you have to be aware of what is happening. And I think legitimacy really is also both international but locally dependent. You'll see many institutions which have the same core task written on the door across many countries, but the way in which they get the legitimacy to operate will be very nationally driven, will be very driven by the culture and expectations of the people in their country. That really sits why we have chosen to use the story, the legend of Tāne Mahuta to talk about our role in society, our role in the financial system of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Central to the Māori belief system is Papatuanuku, the Mother Earth, and Ranganui, the Sky Father, and they loved each other so much that they stuck a little bit too close and the sun could not shine in. Life could not grow, and the wider whānau were living in darkness. Tāne Mahuta, the god of the forest and the birds, chose to separate. He chose to separate to let the sun shine in. He had a few failed attempts. He needed help. Eventually, Tāne Mahuta separated and let the light shine into Aotearoa, New Zealand. From that stage on, we've seen economic, social, cultural, environmental sustainability take hold. We've seen knowledge trade be transferred and grow. And we've seen, as we just heard before, Māori affinity with the land, the sea, the flora, the fauna, grow and be kept. That is a story, a very, very powerful story, and one that we have used with permission, and we will forever try to earn the right to use the story to talk about how we operate as a central bank. Tāne Mahuta thereafter became the kaitiaki, the guardian of this ecosystem. And to be the guardian, you have to have the legitimacy, and you need help. You have to work together with other people. What does this story say about the Reserve Bank of New Zealand? No, I have to say this each time because people struggle with stories at times. No, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand is not anointing itself as a god. We are simply using a story to appeal to a wider audience than usual, and I put this pause in here. We did some work out there, funny that, yes, we do some work from time to time, and we went out to the wider community and said, what do you think of us? And they said, we really trust you, but we have no idea what you do. We found that as not a very strong or wide basis for trust, and so what we have woken up to is we need to have a much wider base of korero, of understanding of what we do, why we do it, why it matters, and tie it back to that higher goal of well-being, sustainable well-being. So the Reserve Bank, we've only been around since 1934, so we're the new kids on the block down in the hood here. And in 1934, with the central bank having been created, it meant that New Zealand had its own currency, its own financial system, its own credit cycle. It was able to start to let the sun shine into New Zealand's financial system rather than relying on the credit swings and roundabouts of foreign providers of capital. And so this is a big part around allowing the Tāne Mahuta story to resonate for us. There's two main kind of lessons I think that the Reserve Bank is drawing from the Tāne Mahuta story. One is that we all love progress, but we resist change. And so for us to be able to evolve through time, we are having to work very hard, challenging ourselves to accept change, challenging well understood knowledge, preconceptions, and making sure these things still work for today. Our Reserve Bank Act is 30 years old, and that is why we are working with the Treasury, and I do want to acknowledge Gabriel Makaloff, Secretary of the Treasury here. We've been jointly working together and very hard on both this change I'm going to talk about, the monetary policy, but ongoing legislative change, all in the aim of this productive, sustainable economy and the role of the Reserve Bank. So the first thing is that change is hard, and we're working through that. The second one is change can't happen alone. I've mentioned some of our partners, but what we're doing at the Reserve Bank is reaching out far more to a wider group of people to work with us through change. Our Council of Financial Regulators, for example, are a fantastic resource. We were working with the Financial Markets Authority, very close hand in hand on what change will best suit the bank for the future. But amongst all of this, it's about us earning legitimacy, it's about having a social licence, and it's about being proud of Te Pūtea Mātua, your central bank, our central bank. Let's bring this back to, I suppose, the environment that we're operating in. And I have to say that over the past decade or so, central banks have been flavour du jour. You know, we have been asked to do so much, and in fact, central banks are probably being asked to do more than what they are capable of at times. We helped significantly manage the dire economic consequences of the global financial crisis. People will argue we're also party to the crime to begin with. But central banks have been pumping liquidity and supporting financial systems now significantly for the last 10 years. That challenge has not gone away. In fact, it's more nuanced and more complex now, which I'll come to. Likewise, you know, in the world, it's far more interconnected. And a lot of the globe and a lot of economic activity is working at times at cross purposes. We have underlying interactions, as we see, between societals, between societies, between political movements. They're all aiming at a certain common goal, which is economic well-being for themselves or their group, their whānau, whoever they are representing. And some of them are doing it for current, and many are doing it for current and future generations. And the climate change challenge is one of these ones. I have to say, across the challenges of the global financial crisis and the legacy it's left, and then all of this interconnectedness, and then the new challenges, we have barely scratched the surface in understanding as economic agents of how to manage our way through this. But we won't shy away from that challenge. Too often the desire for well-being as individuals, as societies, is reflected in, I would say, discontent. And generally it's along the lines of national economies at the cost of others, gender, race, intergenerational inequities. All of these things come out as discontent, even though the intent is for longer-term sustainable economic well-being. These are just a few, and what we have heard loud and clear, both in this country and I believe even more so globally, is that social inclusion has to be a way forward for capitalism. And so this is a big challenge around making sure people are included. I just saw some nodding in the crowd, not nodding off, just nodding, I think. And I just want to mention, I think it was the same guy who did the foreshore legislation. You're taking a lot of hits today, Tim. But we also have in the room here the representatives of FinCap, which is the connection of all the social budgeting. How many, 2,000 people you've got out there working?
Yeah, 2,000, 60,000 clients.
60,000 clients, and may they not grow in numbers. And these are the people at the bottom of the financial cliff who are seeking inclusion in the financial system. So congratulations on the mahi you're doing, and I know that the Reserve Bank, I will publicly state, will be helping and endorsing whatever we can on the way through. Coercing the banks, of course, as well. Is coercing the right word? Encouraging. Encouraging. So, you know, this inclusion is a big challenge. So all of this has led us to think really hard around what the Reserve Bank can do and whether we're doing the best around adding to the well-being of New Zealand's current and future generations. I do want to say that the success that central banks have had in addressing some of these earlier challenges, I mentioned the global financial crisis, but the real challenge of going from a very high inflation rate to a low and stable inflation rate is fantastic. It is, I've said, in fact, I think I was misinterpreted by our own economics team. I've said going from high to low inflation was an amazing battle. People now just assume low inflation is here always and forever. We must never assume that. We must always work towards it, but don't expect to be given an award for just achieving low and stable inflation, because people take that as given. Please never take that as given, and we certainly won't. The challenge for us looking forward is now far more nuanced, and you know, I've thrown a few ideas out here. Does the remit of the central bank reflect the objectives that are most important to the welfare of our society? I can put that in plural. Every central bank in the world is asking this question of themselves. And do we have the requisite tool sets? You know, are we being given too many targets with too few tools, or too much expectation? Have we overpromised? Are we transparent, clear enough? Are central banks using their influence in an inclusive and transparent way? Are people understanding what our wider role is? The Reserve Bank of New Zealand has some real challenges there, judging from our feedback. They say, we really trust you, I'm not sure what you do. Are we fulfilling our role as stewards of a sound and efficient financial system by creating an effective regulatory regime? That is a big challenge for us, and at the moment our legislation is being considered around the remit, who's in it, who does it, what are we doing. It's all up for open. I do want to encourage wider society to be part of that debate and part of that submission process, because otherwise we only ever hear from one sector, and that would be the regulated entities. And so it really is a call for an open dialogue around the submissions. I'll just stop and put another paid advert from the Reserve Bank in here. I'll do it a couple of times further in the speech, but we are open-minded. We have a lot of submissions out there that we are waiting to hear from people, one in particular around the level of bank capital. I've been criticised often, as recently as yesterday, about you folk have got all fixed minds. No, we haven't. This is why we're going through a consultation process, why we're waiting for submissions, and then we will be working through these in an open way to work out what is best for Aotearoa New Zealand's financial system. So that was a paid advert on the side there. I'd also want to say whether there is alignment across our economic policy and all of the economic establishment in New Zealand or in any country to be able to best manage a future financial crisis. We practiced on the last one. We skinned our knees and elbows. There was a lot of handbag throwing between number one and number two, the terrace, trying to work out who was allowed to put their hand in the purse and write the cheques, and we're actually trying to get that sorted. Because it's just not a good look. So these are hard questions that we will confront. A handbag on you is a good look, Gabriel. You can't say that, can you? I just did that, didn't I? At the Reserve Bank, we do believe it is timely to review our policy and our frameworks and the role we play in wider society to remain fit for purpose, and this is what we're about. Over the past year, we've embarked on several review and public consultation processes, some of which are still underway, as I've mentioned, and they have spanned monetary, financial policy frameworks, and even our currency. And our currency, as we all know, is being used, it's being challenged as to whether it's useful anymore. Electronic payments, I don't have to talk about Bitcoin anymore, that's worked itself out. All of these technology challenges to the simple means of payment. We also have to remember that there are some parts of society who absolutely rely on physical currency. So again, what is good for some may not be good for all, and we're working our way through that. We're not alone in conducting these reviews. This isn't some kind of immediate epiphany from the Reserve Bank. When I look across the world, Sweden, Norway, they're all undergoing reviews of exactly these issues at the moment, their frameworks. The US Federal Reserve, they have initiated a review on their strategies, their tools and their communication practices. And the Bank of Canada is right in the middle of their regular 5-year navel-gazing exercise to say, are we doing the right thing by our monetary policy, the inflation agreement? So beyond this, I mean, calls for further resilience to the financial system are also very, very loud. Internationally, we've had the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, being very, very animated about the lack of progress that we have made post-GFC in building the resilience of our financial systems. It's too easy to fall back to how we used to roll. So the first review of the Reserve Bank Act of 1989 has been completed, and come 1 April we are operating under the new Act. What is happening there? I mean, let's just think about the 1989 Act. That was born in a period of very high and variable inflation, and it came out of a period of New Zealand trying many, many different ways of constraining inflation. Some of us will remember wage and price freezes. Some still have them. We went through so many different ways of trying to control inflation, and what we ended up coming out with from society and many, many smart people, some who I'm looking at are in this room here, the Reserve Bank Act came out where the operational independence was given to this institution to achieve the objective of price stability. Came with it was this role of a single decision maker, the governor, the CEO of the bank, who had sole responsibility and accountability for achieving this low inflation, and that accountability was given from the government, the representative of the people, to the governor via a policy targets agreement. So you had written down what the objectives was, and you were then operationally independent to get on with it. So that came out of a period of extreme challenge for New Zealand and globally of high and variable inflation. I want to congratulate everyone who's been involved, because when you look at the pre and post 1989 period, the inflation rates are chalk and cheese, high and variable, low and stable. And that is an incredible outcome. It's an incredible outcome that has been celebrated globally. I mean, Te Pūtea Mātua was the first central bank in the world to have official inflation targets. It became now almost a global central bank religion around the focus on low and stable inflation. So with such great success, why is this character talking about change now? In large part because life is evolving and societal expectations have changed. Our Act has been amended largely to address these emerging policy changes and policy challenges, I should say, and these are still being discussed. And a big part of it around is to create better transparency and hence legitimacy for society, for the bank to continue to operate and make these big, bold decisions that they have to make. So the Reserve Bank Act now has this dual mandate, low and stable inflation, as well as how we contribute to maximising sustainable employment. Unemployment is low at the moment, but it always remains and will remain one of the largest single challenges to social inclusion, economic inclusion. People who aren't included go off into some very, very dark and unhealthy spaces. The labour market dynamics, both within and across countries, has changed very significantly. Labour is now highly mobile. A big part of this rapid globalisation. The impact of the GFC obviously has significantly shifted where the jobs are and what they're doing, and absolute job certainty. You know, it's really shaken us up. And the ongoing technology changes, and we keep hearing about labour displacement and downward wage pressures because of the growth in technology. What it means is that I think it's always been the case, it's probably just brought it more to the fore, is we can't predict what skills are going to be needed in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time. It's a continuous challenge, and the idea of a job for life in the same institution is a distant thing in the distant past. Likewise, concerns about income and wealth inequalities, low productivity growth, and the impact of population ageing, these all intersect in the dynamics of the labour market. And this is our challenge to understand this better. Historically, the bank has always thought about the labour market, has always talked about the labour market, and our flexible way of inflation targeting has taken a real view around the real side, output and employment. What the legislation does now is it says you are legally obliged to have concern for that. You are legally obliged to tell us how you're having concern for it. You are legally obliged to do the research and understand what you are doing with monetary policy for low and stable inflation, what the implications are for contributing to maximum sustainable employment. So in a sense, we're joining a much wider group of central banks with dual mandates, and we're doing it because we've been afforded to be able to do it through low and stable inflation. So I think it's a wonderful time. In terms of process, I mentioned up until now you had the single decision maker, the governor. When it comes to monetary policy, you're now looking at someone who's no longer the single decision maker come 1 April. People might wonder, is that why I did something the other day? Was it my last swing of the bat? No, we will be operating through a committee. That committee will be made up of 7 people, 4 from within the bank, 3 externals, and we will be working together to harness a diverse range of opinions, to have very, very robust discussions around what the right thing to do is, and then we will be making decisions. If we can't come to a consensus decision, we will go to vote. If we have to vote, you will see the votes. You won't see names attached to the votes, but you'll see how close or not the vote was. You will also get a record of the meetings so that you will understand and see what the main issues and challenges were going on. So you will also get our monetary policy statement so you can see our projections and our activities. So it's lifting the robustness and the transparency of the decision making, all aimed at that legitimacy around our social licence to operate. I do hope it brings much rigour. There's a few combinations to it, which is fantastic. Obviously, you need to know what you're aiming at. We've got our Act, so it says we're operationally independent to go off and do it. We've got a remit that says what we're trying to do, which is the low stable inflation, maximising sustainable employment. We've got a charter that says how should you go about making these decisions, and I've mentioned a bit about robust discussion and recording the meetings and being transparent. And we've got a code of conduct around how we need to behave and how society expects people to behave in an inclusive, deliberate manner as a committee with an enormous responsibility around decision making. So those are the core components. It all sounds, highly scientific and hardwired and technical, but it's about being clear on your operational independence, being clear on your purpose, being clear on how are these decisions made, and being clear on how to behave out there. All pretty standard stuff that we will learn and practice with. I do want to congratulate our external members. They were mentioned yesterday, so we've got Bob Buckle and Peter Harris, who are both Poneke, Wellington, and we've got Caroline Saunders, who is coming up from Christchurch. All very, very smart people, very experienced and very committed to Aotearoa New Zealand. So we will be walking them on board with our team. I'm going to finish. I mean, the story of Tāne Mahuta is a story of change, and it's a theme I do want to end with quickly. Each year, the Minister of Finance writes to all of the government departments, the central bank, the operations, a letter of expectations. And in our one this year, in 2018, the bank was given a renewed strategic direction. These letters are public, by the way. That letter states, in fulfilling its monetary policy mandate, the bank is expected to support sustainable and inclusive growth. And in promoting a sound and financial system, a sound and efficient financial system, the bank is expected to contribute to the living standards of New Zealanders by being a conscientious high-performing regulator. So no challenges there. Sustainable, inclusive growth, conscientious, high-performing regulator. We take this seriously. Our strategic priorities, which are public, all align directly to it. If there's any doubt as to why we're doing it, it's because we are tasked with doing these activities, and we believe they are the best tasks we can do to promote the economic well-being of New Zealand. I've talked about our new monetary policy framework. I've talked about the legislation work that is undergoing at the moment, and the joint work with Treasury around our prudential and regulatory regime. The bank's capital adequacy consultation we're going through at the moment, and I'll just repeat the paid advertisement. It's a consultation. We're open-minded. We're waiting for submissions. Please stop punching at shadows. Exploratory work on the emerging technology of our currency, all core central bank things. Amongst all of this, though, we're operating in an environment which is really complex. At the moment, we're balancing this uncertain growth and continued low nominal interest rates globally. We're balancing that against these highly inflated central bank balance sheets internationally. The real challenge about how much more petrol's in the tank, and when is real side adjustment going to happen. More specifically, as a small open economy and one that is highly dependent on foreign capital and highly foreign banked, we know that if banks fail, it wreaks significant economic damage on us and all future generations. So we are working very, very hard around what best suits the regulatory environment for New Zealand. So the questions we're grappling with, and the smart people, some of who are in this front row and many from in this audience, so do chase them. What effect do low nominal interest rates have on wider financial stability? How can monetary and fiscal coordination work better, in particular during times of low nominal interest rates? And recognising that the impact of bank failures would be much harsher the larger the banks and the more intertwined they are in the economy, what regulatory and prudential settings would best mitigate bank failure? And so these are the core challenges that we're working with and that this legislative change are focusing on. And lastly, I talked about our mandate to support sustainable and inclusive growth and higher living standards. So the bank is wanting and is working more interactively with wider society. Our Te Ao Māori strategy is obviously apparent, and it needs to be more apparent, and I want to again just note that Mahanga, I'm very, very proud that you may be subject to the commercial negotiation. Be prepared to be our kaumātua from this, but our Te Ao Māori strategy is well underway. It's on our website, and we are engaging a lot with the renaissance of the Māori economy and its role in our economic system. We're also focusing on our role both in the region and internationally, and we're refreshing, revamping our international connectedness, and very much so with our region in this world, the South Pacific. Come Monday and Tuesday, we've got all the governors of the Central Bank of the South Pacific here in New Zealand, Tamaki Makaurau, and we are agreeing to a collective vision around how we should work together. It's from the Reserve Bank of Australia, Papua New Guinea, through the South Pacific Islands, and we are going to put down some real work. So watch this space around how we can collectively lift our region. Underscoring our role of wanting to be and needing to be a good global citizen, we're also working very hard on our climate change strategy, both how we roll, but also about our role with regard to the financial system, around how the insurance, how the banks, how are all thinking about their activities, their behaviours when it comes to managing, mitigating these challenges around climate change. And I've mentioned our work on the currency, which I don't want to underestimate. It's going to be interesting, this one. We've watched as recently, I think overnight, Sweden now talking about, this is coming through the media, about having to have an actual law to say that banks have to hold currency paper because some parts of society need it. And so this is another area of long-term versus short-term thinking that has to be challenged on the way through. So I'm told that the first step to running a marathon is that you tell everyone you're going to run one. I think it's called commitment, and you've just been told of our intentions to work collectively, locally, regionally, globally, in pursuit of maximising our mandate. We truly desire to be a great team and the best central bank in the world, and all of the bits I've outlined to you today are the working components standing on the solid platform that past people who've worked for this bank and current people who've worked for this bank have created. We are standing on the shoulders of those giants. So let's work together for the well-being of everyone. Mai taki, thank you.